say you're more of a big picture kind of person. In that case, you may be more interested in learning about climate. Let's give it a whirl.
Climate.
Climate is the average weather condition in an area as measured over a long period of time. In other words, climate is what the weather is generally like in a place.
We typically describe climate in terms of temperature and precipitation. Like, when we say that Fiji is hot and humid, we are saying that it generally has high temperatures and lots of moisture.
Of course, it doesn't mean Fiji could never have a cold day. It just means that it's rare. Remember, climate refers to a place's typical weather condition. There are always exceptions.
But what makes Fiji hot and humid or Ireland mild and moist? What types of things affect a place's climate?
Lots of interacting factors, like ocean currents. Ocean currents carry warm and cold water to different places around the globe. For example, Ireland is pretty far north. It would have a much colder climate were it not for the warm Gulf Stream that flows up from warmer regions.
Winds are another thing that affect climate. You might hear a weather person mention that the prevailing wind is from the northeast. What does that mean? It means that even though the wind whips and swirls all over the place, it has a general direction that it's blowing in most of the time.
Winds can be moist or dry depending on whether they form from hot or cold air. So winds can affect whether a place's climate is wet or dry.
It may not surprise you that mountains also affect climate. They just butt their humongous selves right up into the middle of everything and get in the way.
It doesn't matter whether you're in Alaska or Hawaii. If you're at the top of a mountain, there's going to be snow. That's because the higher you go, the colder it gets. So, elevation also affects climate.
Another way mountains affect climate is by creating rain shadows. Check it out.
Air passing by a mountain has to go up over it. As it rises, it gets colder. This causes it to precipitate in the form of snow or rain before reaching the other side of the mountain. By the time the air gets to the other side of the mountain, it's dry air.
So one side of the mountain gets all the water and the other side gets hardly any. We say that the dry side of the mountain is in rain shadow. Places in rain shadow often become deserts.
Now there's one last factor we'll talk about that majorly affects climate. Can you guess what it is?
Latitude. Latitude is the distance a place is from the equator. For example, Dublin is located at about 50 degrees north of the equator.
When it comes to climate, it doesn't matter so much whether a place is north or south of the equator. What matters is how far the place is from the equator in either direction.
Remember, the equator receives the most year-round solar energy. So, the closer a place is to the equator, the warmer it tends to be, and the farther a place is from the equator, the colder it tends to be.
Conveniently, the weather people have divided the globe into 3 major climate zones according to latitude. As you can see, we have polar, temperate, and tropical zones.
Temperature-wise, the tropical zones are hot, the temperate zones average, and the polar zones cold. But remember that climate is also characterized by precipitation. You got a passport, right? Let's take a spin around the globe to understand this better.
First, we'll take a tour of the tropics. Pack that bug spray. Our first stop is the Amazon rainforest of South America.
The Amazon is a tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests occur in parts of the tropics that receive high amounts of rainfall.
Now let's travel over to East Africa to visit the Serengeti Plains of Tanzania. As you can see, the Serengeti Plains are also in the tropics, but because they receive far less rainfall than the Amazon, they're not a rainforest.
Instead, the Serengeti Plains are an example of a tropical grassland or savanna. Tropical grasslands occur where there's not enough moisture to support a rainforest.
Let's move on. Next stop, the Sahara Desert in Africa. Notice that we're still in the tropics.
But this time we're in a tropical desert. Tropical deserts occur in tropical areas where there is hardly any rainfall. As you can probably imagine, they're hot and dry.
But not all deserts are hot. Don't believe it? Well, I hope you pack some warm clothes because we're about to leave the tropics. Finally! Next stop, Antarctica.
Did you know that Antarctica is a desert? It's super dry, receiving barely more than 8 inches of rainfall per year.
The point is that climate is not only determined by temperature, but also by precipitation. And so, within each climate zone, You can have different climate regions that are determined by precipitation.
As you can see, the term desert simply refers to a place where precipitation levels are extremely low. A desert can occur in any climate zone, in the poles, the tropics, or the temperate zone.
The same thing goes for rainforests. They can occur anywhere where precipitation levels are extremely high, not just in the tropics. For example, there is a temperate rainforest in the Pacific Northwestern United States.
These different regions within each climate zone are called biomes. Biomes are like little kingdoms. They each contain different types of plants and animals that are suited to that particular landscape and climate.
Hey, don't put that suitcase away just yet. We're not quite finished. We have to pay a visit to the temperate zones. Most of the United States is in a temperate zone.
Temperate zones have moderate temperatures and moderate amounts of precipitation. That means they're not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, and not too dry. You might say they're just right.
But temperate zones also have highly variable weather. In many temperate areas, you can sleigh ride in the winter, swim in the summer, pick flowers in the spring, or rake leaves in the fall, all in one place. Temperate zones are where we find 4 clearly defined seasons.
Ah, the summers of my youth at Wilburshire, we would catch pixies in jars, lick sap from the trees, and take pride in the size of the grass stains on our trousers. But come winter, there were no more grass stains, only mortifying games of charades and very boring tasting soup.
So the next time you're planning a vacation, remember the following things about climate. Number 1, climate refers to the average weather conditions of a place over long periods of time. Number 2, a place's climate is generally described by its temperature and precipitation. Number 3, climate can be affected by ocean currents, winds, mountains, and latitude. And number 4, smaller climate regions within climate zones are called biomes.